Golden Lion Shiki was the original Kaido, which I have to say is a much more appealing design than what we thought was the original Kaido, which is this thing. Oda intended for Shiki to be a bit of a big deal. He is the only canon movie villain plucked straight from the future pages of the manga and gifted to the project that would become Strong World. But his story bears a stunning amount of similarities with Kaido's story, to the point where Shiki was very potentially one of Oda's original 4 emperors. However, an incident arose and Oda decided to replace him with Kaido. We're going to talk about what that incident was, as well as some other crazy series-shaping stuff that spawned directly from Strong World, and just for fun, we are going to discover if Shiki could defeat Kaido in a fight battle. But let's begin with the genesis for One Piece film Strong World. This was the 10th film in the One Piece franchise and the first to be written by series author Eiichiro Oda. Usually Oda just provides character sketches and gives, like the general thumbs up for the story, but not this time though. Nah. This was a pure shot of One Piece. Originally, the film was going to be named The Crystal Ship's Log, and Oda intended it to be a much more emotional story that was going to focus on nostalgia and memories and all of that stuff. But then Oda went, yeah, nah. And then he got bored with that idea, deciding instead to turn the film into an action-packed fight battlesome spectacle. I mean, I say bored, but in reality, it was probably just a less marketable film at the time. Shiki was still intended to be the main antagonist though, and we did actually get a teaser trailer for The Crystal Ship's Log before the idea was changed. And amongst other characters in the teaser trailer, we see Shanks and Whitebeard commenting about Shiki's resurgence into the world. I didn't think there was anything left of this name but a legend. Neither Shanks nor Whitebeard would end up appearing in the finished film, but the reason why we see them is because their dialogue was originally supposed to happen in the One Piece manga. In an interview taken from the Strong World art book, Oda said that it was his intention to introduce Shiki into the series during the conversation held between Shanks and Whitebeard at the end of Water 7. That infamous scene where they end up splitting the sky as a result of a mild tantrum. Now this also happened to be smack bang where Kaido's name was first introduced to us. But first, it's dog time. Because this video is sponsored by Established Titles, a project based on a Scottish custom whereby landowners are referred to as lords, lairds, and ladies in English. In fact, my dog has recently become Lord Don Quixote Dog Flamingo, and is currently frantically swimming for his life due to a sudden case of Kraken. Title packs give you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land with a unique plot number on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland. And with them you can officially include the title of Lord, Laird, or Lady on credit cards and stuff. It's amazing. Established Titles is a fun and novel way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland, and Established Titles plants a tree with every order, working with global charities to support restoration efforts. Plus, the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will be effectively next to my plot. So depending on how many of you want to be lords and ladies, we could even build our own little Scottish Grand Line Kingdom. Go to establishedtitles.com/dogflamingo to shop their Black Friday sale and get an additional 10% off using code DOGFLAMINGO to support the channel and my dog's ego. Speaking of, Dog Flamingo has washed up on a very familiar but much more Spanish than Scottish island, and I'm sure nothing can possibly go wrong. So do that thing, but for now it's back to you, me. Kaido was conceptually crafted in chapter 432, after which point we would proceed to hear little to nothing about him for another, 300 to 400 chapters, and the conversation between Shanks and Whitebeard occurred 2 chapters later in 434. So there was a 1 chapter gap between us learning Kaido's name and when we were supposed to learn Shiki's name. Bear in mind, this was way back in 2006, and Strong World wouldn't be released until 2009. So it's highly unlikely that the existence of a film project that may or may not have existed yet encouraged Oda to stick Shiki in the narrative freezer and save him for a later date. I think it's more likely that Shiki was an idea that Oda either cut or, just shoved into the background before the film existed. I think that Shiki was going to be set up as a main antagonist with his own canon arc, and knowing his lineage now, potentially serve as one of the 4 emperors in Kaido's place. Okay, so that's a big leap. Why do I say Kaido instead of Big Mom, or in fact at all? In fact, why am I even talking right now, and why are you listening? Well, firstly, reasons, and secondly, because you need something to do while you're commuting. My main reasoning for equating Shiki with Kaido is because Strong World, in essence, is a condensed Wano, and Shiki is a prototype Kaido. Now please join me on a journey of parallels. Both characters were notorious members of the Rocks Pirates. Both share a heavily Japanese aesthetic, with Shiki's attire and decor suggesting that he was either a Wano native or a Wano colonizer. Both Shiki and Kaido's master plan was to build an army of beasts. Shiki chose the more traditional route of crafting giant tigers and things, whilst Kaido went a bit more experimental and wacky with the smile fruits. Both Rocks alumni feature a science-based second in command, be it a cyborg Chonkasaur or or a fart clown. Both villains were beaten by Luffy with a god-based attack from the sky, and are also the only two antagonists that have had to face attacks from Luffy incorporating lightning. Shiki was beaten by a Gomu Gomu no Giganto Thor, whilst against Kaido he channeled his inner Zeus to throw lightning at a fish. Here's a crazy one though. Both Shiki and Kaido had to wait 20 years to enact their plans. And speaking of plans, both of them had the same general goal of, I don't know, let's destroy some stuff, like a lot of stuff. Both villains make giant islands float, and Luffy needs the help of a flying friend to ultimately defeat them. That would be Momonosuke against Kaido, and the true shogun of Wano, Billy, the Electro Duck versus Shiki. Both of them also subjugated populations, but to be fair, almost every villain does that. It's pretty much the first box you tick off on the list right after kill someone's mentor and become a depressed alcoholic. Also, both villains were beaten after the Straw Hats conducted a successful raid on their base at night under a full moon. So that's it, but that's a lot of stuff. Now, to be fair, there are a ton of differences as well. And I personally hate using parallels as evidence for any argument in a series this big, but all I'm saying is that if we were on Mori or a similar piece of trash programming, then Kaido's results would be back, and yes, Shiki is the father. Now, weirdly enough, this isn't even the strangest conspiracy theory that spawned from Strong World and Shiki's generally canonically vague existence. And there was a period in the history of the One Piece fandom that it was popularly thought that Big Mom and Kaido were going to form an alliance with Shiki and may even have originally been part of his crew. And to even begin to explain this, it needs to be mentioned that when Strong World was announced, there was no indication on whether it would be canon or not. Obviously, in this day and age, we just know that whether Oda is involved or not, it's going to be its own thing. But back in 2009, as a film written by Oda, it looked like it could be an official part of One Piece, which was in stark opposition to the previous film episode of Chopper Plus, where we took something that was canon and deliberately messed around with it to make it not canon. It was such a strange idea. Like, let's go to Drum Island, let's do that again, except this time Frankie's there and Luffy can use Gear Second. Oh, and also, let's not forget the best idea in the world. Who's everyone's favorite One Piece villain? That's right, it's Wapol. So let's give him an older brother named Mashul. Everyone's gonna go mad for Mashul. He's like Katakuri levels of cool before Katakuri even existed. In fact, Mashul's existence completely nullifies any need for any Katakuri, because just like hooking up two air conditioners on a single 240-volt outlet, there is only so much cool that we can handle. That is exactly what was going through the producers' minds with the episode of Chopper. And before you ask, why yes, I did actually pay one of my artists to draw this image of Mashul. Look, mistakes were made. So please do watch the ads on this video to help me pay my crippling Mashul bill. But the point is that juxtaposed against movie 9, Strong World had a very strong feeling of canon attached. And what infinitely assisted that impression was actually the release of Chapter 0. This is where a lot of the fan base gets confused when it comes to Shiki. But basically, everything in Chapter 0, 100% canon. Everything in the Strong World film, 100% not canon. But Chapter 0 featured the Battle of Red War, where Shiki was able to corner the Pirate King, which included these three oddly detailed designs of Shiki's crew members, and potentially even his equivalent of commanders. And for what seems like an awfully long time, it was a very popular idea to suggest that on the left was Big Mom, and the figure we see on the right was Kaido. Bearing in mind that at this point in the series, the only image we had ever seen of Big Mom and Kaido were Garp silhouettes, and especially in the case of Kaido, this dude guy, well, he looked shockingly similar. I know, it sounds stupid, and it is stupid, but this is a good way to think of the ultimate destiny of all One Piece theories. Back in the day, this seemed very plausible. So any fan theories that you're currently invested in right now, 99% of them are going to be remembered every bit as ridiculously as this idea. But with all of that in mind, I now need to ask, would Shiki have been a better villain than Kaido? And the answer is not as simple as you might think. Strong World needs a good rinse cycle followed by a tumble dry because it did Shiki very, very dirty on all fronts. We can't really use the film in any way to gauge what Shiki would have been like in the manga, but what we can use to gauge what Shiki would have been like in the manga is what he was like in the manga. Chapter 0 paints Shiki as one of the most insane global powerhouses to have ever existed. He was known as an equal of Roger, and this Lionman was on the verge of toppling the future Pirate King during the Battle of Red War. He commanded a fleet of 51 divisions and may even have been the largest pirate force of his time. Were it not for vaguely defined fate, Roger would have died. I mean, he did die, but like sooner. But even after this, Shiki pulled a Whitebeard and invaded Marineford. Except unlike Edward Newgate, Shiki did it on his own as a one-man army. And after this moment, it is official that the only person in the series who has more balls than Shiki is Captain Very Good. And that's only because he is quite literally balls. It took both Garp and Sengoku in their prime to stop him. And even then, Shiki still managed to destroy half of Marineford in the process. If he was still alive today, and as far as we know he is, he'd be a figure more along the lines of someone like Silver's Ray Lee, and not at all the feeble old man beaten by pre-time skip Luffy in Strong World. In reality, Luffy versus Shiki would have gone down something like this. You're a bad man, Shiki. That's a factually accurate statement, Straw Hat, but what are you gonna do about it? Hit me with your haki? Wait, what's haki? Exactly. And And then Luffy dies and One Piece is renamed The Grand Adventures of Shiki the Wonder Lion. Shiki is not to be underestimated, and in his prime, I think he could have brought down Kaido. Remember that Shiki and Kaido have quite an age gap, so back in the good old days, Shiki would have been an accomplished global veteran, whilst Kaido was still very much a rookie who was quite well known for losing in the art of battle punching. If the two of them were to fight 20 years ago, I think Shiki probably comes out on top. Although if we change that to modern day, then Kaido takes an easy dub and sticks it right in Shiki's head, much like a steering wheel. But when comparing the two, I also find myself much more invested in Shiki's backstory. Funnily enough, if someone was to read One Piece as chronologically presented, then they would start with Chapter 0 and probably get the impression that Shiki was the main character, because Shiki got a whole 23 chapter dedicated to his history, his motivation, and his dreams for the future. Granted, it was a brief history of Shiki. However, Kaido's history was even briefer because it can essentially be summed up by a McDonald's drink menu. He was small, medium, and large, and then he died, probably. Such a memorable story. I shall tell it to my future children every night. Weirdly enough, right now Shiki has a lot more potential for the future of One Piece than Kaido does, because as stated before, he may still exist in the world. What we can assume is that his plan from Chapter 0 failed, because that was supposed to happen 2 years ago and it didn't, which gives us a series of potential outcomes. The first is the very morbid scenario where Shiki died before he could realize his plan. The second is that Shiki did enact his plan but was stopped by another global force, perhaps some sort of red-haired Shanks, because he did have a soft spot for Shiki's target of East Blue, due to that being the home of his baby and baby mama. 3. Shiki's fictional science didn't work or it was delayed. Or 4. Over 2 decades, Shiki had a change of heart and instead decided to pursue the wonderful world of retirement. I would like to think that Shiki is still alive in One Piece, and there is one very big piece of evidence to suggest that he is, which is the mystery man drinking with Crocus on the cover of Chapter 631, a man whose official Shueisha digital color scheme is the same orange and yellow as that of Shiki, with the same blonde hair, albeit much shorter. This guy has been one of the most enduring mysteries in One Piece. Clearly dressed in an outfit from Wano, we've heard all sorts of suggestions for who it could be. At one point, Kawamatsu or another unknown vassal was a popular idea, and then we have the more crackpot theories of it being a time-traveling Toki or even an Odin. Plus, there's also the suggestion that it's Copacabana, because every unknown character ends up being labeled as Copacabana. Stop doing it. But after Wano, we are drawing a serious blank as to who this figure is. And right now, I think the only reasonable idea we have is that this is Shiki, casually meandering his way around the world on his retirement tour.